Hey everybody, Quantum here, and in this video I'm going to go over some quick simulations and reasons why you might want to choose Sapphire Amethyst as a deck to play, even over something like Ruby Amethyst, which has traditionally been the strongest pairing with Amethyst. You know, Emerald Amethyst is obviously up there as well. But in this video, in this first match, we're going to take a look at Sapphire Amethyst going up against Amethyst Steel Hyper Aggro. This is the list that essentially came top 4 in Battle of the Bay in November. So on the draw, you could say that, you know, a tempo-oriented deck like Sapphire Amethyst would be fairly weak into Hyper Aggro, and you wouldn't be necessarily wrong. I mean, there's a reason why the deck came top 4, beating out the rest of the field. But one of the nicest things, and one of the main reasons why you would pair Sapphire with Amethyst, is because when you are on the draw, it's one of the decks that can help you claw back advantage very early in the forms of the Tipo and the Sail the Azure Sea now, being basically a splashable engine. When you think about what Ruby Amethyst does, it seeks to make up for any disadvantages by getting very efficient removal trades, but that usually doesn't come until later on in the game, right? You see things like Maui going 2 for 1. Eventually, they'll outgrind you and out-resource you thanks to the Amethyst draw side of the deck, and then when you skip an ink, they'll make up for that ink disadvantage. You switch to a deck like Sapphire Amethyst, and you're proactively doing that. On 2, which is what you saw us do here. I mean, maybe the opponent skipped an ink as well at this point, but if you're able to drop that Tipo or Sail the Azure Sea, you claw back that disadvantage on ink and disadvantage from playing from behind almost immediately, right, by turn 2. Because now you're able to start playing your higher cost ink interactions a turn earlier than your opponent now. So what ended up starting off as a disadvantage for you being on the draw, yes, you get the extra card, but you are constantly reacting to your opponent's board. Now you can maybe switch to that. And one of the main facilitators of being able to do that and kind of establishing board control is the utilization of 4 crabs. Again, if you watch my deck profile, I kind of talk through this a little bit. But the crab being able to give +3 to either a Diablo, which will replace itself, or get extra utilization off of a Tipo, which already used its effect to get you that tempo back in terms of the extra ink, you're now trading either of those bodies, which you've played on either 1 and or 2, and then crab on 3. It curves out so nicely for you to be able to get that tempo back by getting the extra ink, and then trade up with a Diablo or get value out of your Tipo even further by taking out a major threat. You end with a crab on board still, so a 3/3 body for 3, and you outed an opponent's threat while gaining some sort of advantage, either card draw through the Diablo or the ramp option through the Tipo. Now, in this particular matchup against Hyper Aggro, you know, they're going to get a little far ahead, but it's really about what can you do in the mid game to slow them down. And now that we are at the mid game, the ramp options and stuff that I just talked about there don't really apply too much in a matchup like Hyper Aggro because they're not going past like 4 or 5 ink anyways usually. They're just constantly dropping threats. But being on the Amethyst control aspect, you are able to value and play out things like this Elsa that I have in my hand here in order to slow the opponent down. So here you see us making a very odd decision here. I guess we're going to let them quest with the 4 lore on the Mr. Arrows, which is questionable. I should have maybe played out an Elsa, but I guess I was waiting to see what the opponent had. And then being able to cycle your Elsas here is very valuable also. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Just wait for them to tap it down themselves and see what they opted to play on the follow-up. But yeah, being able to cycle through your Mim cards and then use them to cycle back high value targets like your Elsa in order to redrop it, and obviously like Merlin Rabbits to draw, it ensures that you have a lot of answers in the form of obviously non-Ruby like removal, in the form of tapping things down and whatnot, and through just overwhelming the board with threats that you can kind of make up for any disadvantages that you may have from the earlier part of the game in terms of lore. So here, you know, the opponent is going to drop a Maleficent and a Fox, and then they're going to get some value out of the Fox by slowing us down just a little bit, taking out the Diablo. As a Hyper Aggro player, you can argue that they don't challenge there because they're just going to wait to quest, but they don't know that we have double Elsa in hand. So the Elsa comes in and misclicks on the Mim Fox instead of the Maleficent, obviously. So now I have to live with that misclick. So the opponent will get to 17 instead of me taking out both of their threats here. But yeah, we'll just make do with what we have. So it just goes to show you can misplay with this deck. And you know, it's not going to be the end of the world, but obviously you wouldn't make that kind of a misplay in person. And again, this is just against the CPU, so not a competitive match by any means, just showing you some of the lines of play that you can go for. But what you've seen in this match so far is us utilize some of the control aspects with the tap down cards in order to control board state. And at this point in the game, you know, unless the opponent was going to close out the game with like a multiple goat cycles, which they can't really do too effectively since they're very limited on ink. Like they can play the goat and then they have to pass and hope that it survives so it can quest and then be cycled. They're not like on Ruby Amethyst where they can get to 10 ink and then, you know, do goat, fox, goat, right, for like 3 lore in a single turn. But regardless, you know, they get to 17 here, they drop a crab, and I'm going to have to use my second Elsa to tap down that crab and then just clean up the board again. They've got 2 cards left in hand. I have a Mim Snake that I can use to bounce back my Elsa when I need to, so that I can tap down whatever big threat they drop on the next turn. And at this point, we're getting very close to closing out the game ourselves. The Genie, again, just has enabled Amethyst to really come back to the forefront of the meta. I keep saying that we're in a Genie-oriented meta here, but yeah, it's really strong. So you can argue that I shouldn't have inked the Baymax because that would have helped me win faster, but it doesn't really matter at this point. They're going to drop double Cusco, and we're going to draw a Hades. And at this point in the game, Hades is really valuable for, you know, not really mattering that it gives your opponent the extra ink, but just being that card that locks up the game for you. Because when you play Hades, either you should win in the next turn or your opponent's going to win in the next turn. So it's either one or the other. So Hades is still a decent form of removal for Sapphire Amethyst, and that's why we've opted to include it here. Get to 19, so yeah, if I didn't ink that Baymax, I probably could have won, but we know that, again, they can't cycle goats effectively in a low-to-the-ground deck like this, so we end up taking that game. If you've made it this far in the video, then this is where you will see the benefit of what I was talking about at the beginning. The opponent ends up inking and dropping a Chernobog Followers. If the opponent on Ruby Amethyst here drops a Flynn on 2, you're going to want to try to develop the Mim Snake on 2, so you have counterplay against that. If they don't develop the Flynn, or in this case, you know, don't get the 2-drop that they want at all, you can opt to go with a Tipo and claw back that advantage. Because the opponent has no threat, we can actually generate the card advantage, and we don't need the extra body in the Tipo, because the sale of the Azuret Sea into a second Diablo is just insane value here. Like, this one interaction has basically, I don't want to say won me the game, but it's gotten me very, very far ahead. We have retained the ink advantage now, or clawed back the ink advantage from being on the draw. We had the extra card, we have the threats on board, we have the lore advantage. Yes, the opponent has 7, now 8 cards in hand, 4 ink as well. We only have 4 cards in hand, but we have 3 cards on the board, all of which have or will replace themselves, basically. Right? The opponent drops a Genie here, and, you know, we could have inked, tapped down the Genie, and thrown our Genie and our Elsa into their Genie. But because we now have control of the match, we have tempo, we're able to just quest out and cycle the Genie. The reason I do this is because I don't want to risk them boosting their Genie with, like, a Crab. Even though this Ruby Amethyst list, I think, was Ed's list, who was not on Crab, I think, or very close to Ed's list. But I don't want to leave my Genie exposed to getting boosted and having the opposing Genie boosted and challenging into my Genie losing it, because my Genie is the counterplay right now to their Genie as well. Now, they do opt to develop a second Genie as well as a Chernobog Followers, which is a bit of a problem. And because they're coming up on 6 ink, this is where it can be scary. They could drop a Medusa and then start clawing back a ton of advantage off of that Genie. And this is where a deck like Ruby Amethyst can sort of start to run away with the game a little bit. Because, yeah, you just have to be very, very careful here. Now, again, the CPU makes an odd play. They could have used Genie and an Elsa to challenge into my Genie, but opt not to there. That would have ensured that their Genie would have survived. But because they challenged with the Chernobog Followers, I would have been able to throw my Snake into the Chernobog anyways, and then move 2 damage from one of the Genies with this Bell onto the Genie that ended up challenging my Genie to instantly out one of their Genies. And then I would be able to Hades the other Genie. And that takes care of 2 out of the usual 3 Genies that this deck plays. Again, Ed's version, and I think Noimnot's version only plays 2 Genie. Ed's version plays 3 Genies. So very few Ruby Amethysts are actually on 4 Genie. And once you've dealt with 2 out of the 2 or 3 Genies in the deck, the matchup becomes much more manageable. So you can already see, like, ramping to get to that Hades a turn early, using the Bell for that interaction that I talked about in the deck profile. the matchup against Ruby Amethyst isn't a total wash or a total loss. It is very play draw dependent, but if you can get that advantage back with like the Tipo or say the Azeroth Sea Ink in order to be the one progressively developing threats, like the card advantage you can see here, it's not a problem. We have some of the control options in terms of the Hades and the Elsa. The Bell comes down and you know does its thing. Yes, we do have to fear the Be Prepared, but as long as you're adequately playing around that, you should be fine. And again, some Ruby Amethyst lists are playing Sisu, so you could argue here like, you know, getting rid of the Sisu for the potential shift. I mean, they're on 8 ink anyway, so they're going to be able to hard cast the big Sisu if they want anyways. You have to be very wary of that as well, because one of the main reasons why Ruby Amethyst decks are teching in big Sisu is for the opposing genie, and it is very, very strong. Like if they end up nuking 2 of your genies on board, you pretty much lose the game as the Sapphire Amethyst player against any Amethyst deck. Emerald Amethyst, like the big Sisu does so much work into Emerald Amethyst, which is one of the reasons why Ruby Amethyst is still a thing. It doesn't get completely blown out by decks that used to be very good into it. It's a very solid deck still. But here we have to be very careful. We have the Bell that's exerted. I think I opt to play Hades here because I'm expecting a Be Prepared, and I want to get their Rabbit out of rotation. Because I don't even remember how many rabbits I've dealt with. I thought I dealt with like 1 rabbit already. And again, Ruby Amethyst usually not on 4 rabbits anymore. They're on 3 rabbits or 2 rabbits because they're on the genies as well. So you can see how nuanced this matchup becomes. It's like, what threats do I need to deal with because of ratios basically now. The opponent goes wide here, so they're not playing through to the Be Prepared, which again would be a tempo loss for them. So I'm forced to go a little bit wide. So this is actually decent decision making by the CPU, forcing me to commit more to the board because they went wide. And this is why Ruby Amethyst is still strong. It's like they're forcing me into decisions, but again, not challenging. And again, they misplayed a few times earlier. Not challenging, allowing me to get to 18 basically means I win the game because I can close out with Goat, similar to how they close out with Goat as well. They forget the quest with the Diablo, but that's fine. They sing Be Prepared, so they still have all 9 ink available. Drop Sisu, drop Maui, but again, it doesn't matter. We have Goat, we just drop Goat and pass, and we have game. But we draw the Fox for turn, and that's going to allow us to win the game. So again, not competitive matches, but just showing you some of the concepts of this deck. Let me know if you made it this far in the video and what you thought. Thank you again for watching. Quantum is out.